Hi again, everybody. It's Miss B back with story time. Yesterday we met Flat Stanley, and we learned that he got flattened during the night when a big bulletin board fell on him. And he also was so flat he could fit through a grate on the sidewalk and find his mom's ring and be folded into an envelope to be mailed for spring break vacation to a friend in California. We're going to meet back up with Stanley and his family and find out what happens next in his original adventure. Who knows what's going to happen? Is anybody else ever wondering if he's going to go back to normal? That's in my head, and I hope you're keeping it in your head too. So here we go. Chapter 3, Stanley the Kite. Sounds interesting. Mr. Lambchop had always liked to take the boys out with him on Sunday afternoons to a museum or roller skating in the park, but it was difficult when they were crossing streets or moving about in crowds. Stanley and Arthur would often be jostled from his side, and Mr. Lambchop would worry about speeding taxis or that hurrying people might accidentally knock them down. So jostling's kind of like when you knock into people. You know what it's like on the playground sometimes. It was easier, though, after Stanley got flat. Mr. Lambchop discovered that he could roll Stanley up without hurting him at all. He could tie a piece of string around Stanley to keep him from unrolling and make a little loop in the string for himself. It was as simple as carrying a parcel, which is just another word for package, and he could hold on to Arthur with the other hand. Stanley did not mind being carried because he had never much liked to walk. Arthur didn't like to walk either, but he had to, and it made him mad. One Sunday afternoon in the street, they met Ralph Jones, an old college friend of Mr. Lambchop's. "Well, George, I see you've bought some wallpaper," Mr. Jones said. "Going to decorate your room, I suppose?" "Wallpaper?" said Mr. Lambchop. "Oh, no, that's my son Stanley." He undid the string, and Stanley unrolled. "How do you do?" Stanley said. "Nice to meet you, young feller," the man said. "George," he said to Mr. Lambchop. "That boy is flat." "Smart, too," Mr. Lambchop said. "Stanley is third from the top of his class at school." "Phooey," said Arthur. "This is my younger son, Arthur," Mr. Lambchop said. Okay, there he is meeting Mr. Jones. Okay, so Arthur just said phooey. Yep, he said phooey. And Mr. Lambchop said he will apologize for his rudeness. Arthur could only blush and apologize. Mr. Lambchop rolled Stanley up again, and they set out for home. It rained quite hard while they were on the way. Stanley, of course, hardly got wet at all, just around the edges, but Arthur got soaked. Late that night, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop heard a noise out in the living room. They found Arthur lying on the floor near the bookcase. He had piled a great many volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica on top of himself. Now, an Encyclopedia Britannica are very thick books full of information. It's what we used to use, people my age, before there was Google. "Put some more on me," Arthur said when he saw them. "Just don't stand there, help me." Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop sent him back to bed, but the next morning they spoke to Stanley. "Arthur can't help being jealous," they said. "Be nice to him. You're his big brother after all." The next Sunday, Stanley and Arthur went to the park by themselves. The day was sunny, but windy too, and many other boys were flying beautiful, enormous kites with long tails made in all the colors of the rainbow. Arthur sighed. "Someday," he said, "I will have a big kite, and I will win a kite flying contest and be famous, more famous than everyone else. Nobody knows who I am these days." Stanley remembered what his parents had said. he went to a boy whose kite was broken and borrowed a large spool of string. "You can fly me, Arthur," he said. "Come on." He attached the string to himself and gave Arthur the spool to hold. He ran lightly across the grass, sideways to get up speed, and then he turned to meet the breeze. Up, 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 up went Stanley, being a kite. He knew just how to manage on the gusts of wind. He faced full into the wind if he wanted to rise, and let it take him from behind when he wanted speed. He had only to turn his thin edge to the wind carefully, a little at a time, so that it did not hold him, and then he would slip gracefully down toward the earth again, and there they are. Arthur let out all the string, and Stanley soared high above the trees, a beautiful sight in his red shirt and blue trousers against the pale blue sky. Everyone in the park stood still to watch. Stanley swooped right and then left in long matched swoops. He held his arms by his side and zoomed at the ground like a rocket and curved up again toward the sun. He side-slipped and circled and made figure eights and crosses and a star. Nobody had ever flown the way Stanley Lambchop flew that day. Probably no one ever will again. After a while, of course, people grew tired of watching, and Arthur got tired of running about with the empty spool. Stanley went right on, though, showing off. 3 boys came up to Arthur and invited him to join them for a hot dog and some soda pop. Arthur left the spool wedge in the fork of a tree. He did not notice while he was eating the hot dog that the wind was blowing the string and tangled it about the tree. The string got shorter and shorter, but Stanley did not realize how low he was until leaves brushed his feet, and then it was too late. He got stuck in the branches. 15 minutes passed before Arthur and the other boys heard his cries and climbed up to set him free. Stanley would not speak to his brother that evening, and at bedtime, even though Arthur had apologized, he was still cross. That's right, cross is another word for mad, angry. Alone with Mr. Lambchop in the living room, Mrs. Lambchop sighed and shook her head. "You're at the office all day having fun," she said. "You don't realize what I go through with the boys. They are very difficult." "Kids are like that," Mr. Lambchop said. "Phases. Be patient, dear. And tomorrow we'll come back and enjoy Chapter 4, The Museum Thieves." And of course, I'm trying to figure out how does Stanley fit into that. So, until tomorrow, see you later, kindergarten. Bye.